The warehouse floor fell silent when Howard Bennett's voice echoed off the concrete walls. "You're fired, Cooper. Get out of my sight." Raymond stood there, rainwater pooling at his feet, his shirt still damp with someone else's blood. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. 20 minutes ago, he'd been cradling a pregnant woman's head in his lap, pressing his jacket against her bleeding stomach, whispering that help was coming. Now his coworkers watched in stunned silence as their supervisor, the man who'd covered their shifts, who'd lent money he didn't have, who'd never been late in 7 years, got torn apart in front of everyone. Howard's face was red with fury. "I don't care if the Pope himself was dying. You show up on time, or you don't show up at all." But Howard didn't know who Raymond had saved that morning. And he had no idea that his decision would cost him everything. Sometimes kindness finds its way back, and sometimes it brings justice with it. Raymond Cooper had always believed that morning routines kept life from falling apart. At 5:30 every morning, he'd wake up in the small 2-bedroom apartment he shared with his 8-year-old son, Lucas. The alarm would buzz, and he'd silence it before it could wake the boy sleeping in the next room. He'd make coffee in the same chipped mug he'd owned for a decade, pack Lucas's lunch with whatever groceries he could afford that week, and lay out the boy's school clothes on the chair by his bed. By 6:45, he'd kiss Lucas goodbye and head out the door to make the 20-minute drive to Riverside Distribution Center. 7 years. That's how long Raymond had worked at the warehouse. 7 years of showing up 15 minutes early, of never calling in sick, of staying late when shipments ran behind schedule. He'd started as a floor worker, loading trucks in the summer heat and winter freeze. But Raymond had something most people didn't. He paid attention. He learned the inventory system, memorized the shipping routes, and figured out how to organize the loading bay so trucks could turn around 30 minutes faster. When the old supervisor retired, the regional manager promoted Raymond without hesitation. His coworkers respected him not because he barked orders, but because he'd never asked them to do something he wouldn't do himself. The morning it all fell apart started like any other. Raymond dropped Lucas off at school, watching through the rearview mirror as his son's small frame disappeared through the double doors of Lincoln Elementary. The boy had his mother's dark hair and quiet way of observing the world before speaking. Angela had been gone for 3 years now. A drunk driver on a Tuesday afternoon had made sure of that. Raymond pulled out of the school parking lot and headed toward the highway. The sky was heavy with clouds that promised rain. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:52. Plenty of time. Then he saw her. A woman standing on the sidewalk near the bus stop, one hand pressed against the brick wall of a closed storefront, the other clutching her swollen belly. Even from a distance, Raymond could see something was wrong. She wasn't waiting for a bus. She was doubled over, her face twisted in pain. He slowed the truck, watching her through the rain-streaked windshield. Other cars passed without stopping. People walked by with their umbrellas tilted against the drizzle, eyes fixed on their phones. The woman's knees buckled, and she slid partway down the wall. Raymond pulled over. He didn't think about the time or the schedule or Howard's policy about attendance. He just moved. The rain had started falling harder by the time he reached her, cold drops soaking through his work shirt. Up close, he could see the blood seeping through her gray sweatpants, dark and spreading. Her face was pale, lips trembling. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her eyes met his, wide with fear. "Please," she whispered. "Something's wrong. I think I'm losing the baby." Raymond's hands moved on instinct. He helped the woman to his truck, his arm around her shoulders, guiding her carefully. She was shaking so hard he could feel it through his soaked shirt. He grabbed the emergency blanket from behind the seat and wrapped it around her. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice steady even though his heart was hammering. "Valerie," she managed between gasps. "Valerie Hutchinson." He plugged the nearest hospital into his phone and pressed the gas pedal harder than he should have. "You're not alone," he told her. "Help is coming. Just hold on. He ran 2 red lights and took a turn fast enough that his tires squealed. When they pulled up to the emergency entrance, he half-carried Valerie through the automatic doors, shouting for help. Hospital staff swarmed them with a wheelchair and urgent questions. Before they wheeled her away, Valerie grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved us." A nurse asked if he wanted to leave contact information in case Valerie needed to reach him later. Raymond scribbled his name and phone number on the form, then walked back to his truck. His hands were still shaking when he checked the dashboard clock. 7:43. He was late. Raymond grabbed his phone and called the warehouse. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Riverside Distribution," a voice said. It was Marcus Chen, one of the floor workers. "Marcus, it's Raymond. I need you to tell Howard I'm running late. There was an emergency." Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. "Man, he's already pissed. He's been asking where you are since 7:30. You know how he gets." Raymond closed his eyes. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Just tell him I'm on my way." The drive back felt longer than it was. Rain hammered the windshield, and Raymond's mind replayed the image of Valerie's pale face, the blood on her clothes, the desperation in her voice. He'd done the right thing. He knew that in his bones. But he also knew Howard Bennett didn't care about right and wrong. Raymond had been written up twice in the past 6 months, once for leaving early when Lucas's school called, and once for being 10 minutes late because his truck wouldn't start. Howard had made it clear there wouldn't be a third chance. When Raymond walked through the warehouse entrance at 8:05, the entire floor went quiet. 40 workers in navy shirts stopped what they were doing and turned to look. Howard Bennett stood in the center of the loading bay. His arms crossed over his barrel chest, his face the color of raw steak. He was a big man, 50-something, with a shaved head and a voice that could carry across a football field. He'd been the warehouse manager for 2 years, running the place like a military operation. No exceptions, no excuses, no mercy. "Cooper," Howard's voice echoed off the metal rafters. "You got some nerve showing up now." Raymond walked toward him, his wet shoes squeaking on the concrete. "Howard, I can explain." But Howard wasn't interested in explanations. He stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "You think the rules don't apply to you? You think because you've been here a few years, you can waltz in whenever you feel like it?" Raymond's throat tightened. There was a woman bleeding on the sidewalk. She was pregnant. I had to get her to the hospital. For a moment, something flickered across Howard's face. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Not my problem," Howard said. "You got a phone. You could have called 911 like a normal person." Raymond felt heat rising in his chest. She needed help right then. There wasn't time. Howard cut him off with a sharp laugh. "There's always time to follow procedure, Cooper. But you don't get that, do you? You think you're special. You think you're the hero." He turned to address the whole warehouse. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. I don't care what sob story you got. I don't care if your grandma's dying or your car's on fire. You show up on time or you don't show up at all." He swung back to Raymond. "You're fired, Cooper." "Get out of my sight." The words hit Raymond like a physical blow. Around him, his coworkers stood frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. Raymond saw Marcus's face twisted with anger, saw Jenny Rodriguez cover her mouth with her hand. These were people Raymond had worked beside for years, people he'd helped and relied on. And now they were watching him get humiliated because he'd saved a woman's life. Raymond's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice level. "You're making a mistake, Howard." Howard smirked. "The only mistake here is yours. Now get out before I call security." Raymond didn't argue. He walked to the small office, grabbed his jacket and his thermos, and walked back through the warehouse. As he passed, Marcus reached out and gripped his shoulder. "This is garbage, man," Marcus said quietly. "We all know it." Raymond nodded but didn't trust himself to speak, so he kept walking, through the loading bay, past the rows of stacked pallets, out into the rain that was still falling steadily from the gray sky. He sat in his truck for a long time, his forehead resting against the steering wheel. Raymond's mind raced through the immediate problems. He had $800 in his checking account. Rent was due in 2 weeks. $950. There were groceries to buy, utilities to pay, and Lucas needed new shoes. Without the warehouse job, Raymond had no health insurance, no steady paycheck, no safety net. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck for 3 years, ever since Angela's death had left him with medical bills and funeral costs. But deeper than the money problems was something else, a crushing sense of injustice. He'd done the right thing. He'd helped someone who desperately needed it, and his reward was unemployment and public humiliation. Raymond thought about Lucas, about having to explain to his son why Daddy didn't have a job anymore. The boy was already carrying too much weight for an 8-year-old, and now Raymond would have to tell him things were about to get even harder. The phone rang later that afternoon. Raymond almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Cooper?" A woman's voice, professional and polite. "This is Jennifer Krause from Henderson Logistics. Your name came up as a reference for one of our employees. Do you have a moment?" Raymond's mind went blank. "I think there's been a mistake," he said. "Who is the employee?" There was a pause. "Valerie Hutchinson. She listed you as an emergency contact." Raymond's breath caught. "Is she okay? The baby?" Jennifer's voice softened. "They're both fine. Ms. Hutchinson asked me to track you down and make sure you knew. She wanted to thank you properly." Raymond sat down heavily. "Who is she?" Jennifer hesitated. "Ms. Hutchinson is the CEO of Henderson Logistics. We own the distribution center where you work, or worked. She told me what happened this morning, both what you did for her and what happened when you got to work. Mr. Cooper, Ms. Hutchinson would like to meet with you in person. Would you be available tomorrow afternoon?" Raymond agreed, because he didn't know what else to do. That night, he picked Lucas up from school and made spaghetti for dinner. Lucas chattered about his day, and Raymond tried to listen, tried to focus on his son's animated face. When Lucas asked if something was wrong, Raymond forced a smile. "Just a long day, buddy. Nothing to worry about." Later, after Lucas was asleep, Raymond sat at the kitchen table looking at job listings. He thought about the meeting with Valerie Hutchinson. He had no idea what she wanted. Maybe she felt guilty. If she offered help, he'd take it. He couldn't afford to be proud. The next afternoon, Raymond put on his only dress shirt and drove to Henderson Logistics headquarters downtown. The building was all glass and steel, 20 stories of corporate gleam that made him feel small and out of place. A receptionist checked his name and handed him a visitor badge. 21st floor, she said. The elevator ride felt endless. Raymond didn't know what to expect. He'd never met a CEO before. Valerie Hutchinson's assistant met him when the elevator doors opened and led him down a hallway into an office that overlooked the city. And there, standing by the window, with one hand resting on her stomach, was Valerie. She looked different than she had on the sidewalk, dressed in a charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back, her posture confident. But when she turned and saw Raymond, her professional mask cracked, and tears filled her eyes. "Mr. Cooper," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know where to start." She crossed the room and pulled him into a hug. She was crying now. "You saved my baby," she whispered. "The doctor said if I'd waited even 10 more minutes, I might have lost her. You saved us both." When she pulled back, she wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry. I've been an emotional mess since yesterday." Raymond didn't know what to say. "I'm just glad you're okay, both of you," Valerie gestured to the chairs by her desk. "I found out what happened when you got to work," she said, her expression hardening. "I know Howard Bennett fired you in front of your entire team, and I know why you were late." She leaned forward. "What you did for me wasn't just kind. It was extraordinary. You risked your job, your livelihood, to help a complete stranger. And instead of being thanked, you were punished for it." Raymond shifted in his seat. "I appreciate you saying that, but I don't expect anything. I just did what anyone should do." Valerie shook her head firmly. "That's where you're wrong. Most people wouldn't have stopped. I've been replaying that morning, and I keep thinking about all the cars that drove past me, all the people who looked the other way. You were the only one who stopped." She paused. "I want to make this right. I want to offer you your job back, with a promotion and a significant raise. But before we talk about that, I need to tell you something about Howard Bennett." She opened a folder on her desk and slid it toward Raymond. Inside were emails, financial reports, and employee complaints. "After I found out what happened to you, I asked our HR department to pull Howard's file. What I found was disturbing. Over the past 2 years, there have been 17 formal complaints filed against him. Verbal abuse, discrimination, retaliation, creating a hostile work environment. Every single complaint was dismissed or buried by his supervisor, Gerald Foster, who happens to be Howard's brother-in-law." Valerie's jaw tightened. "On top of that, there are financial discrepancies. Howard has been skimming from the warehouse budget, falsifying overtime reports, approving payments to vendors that don't exist." Raymond stared at the documents. He'd known Howard was a bully, but he'd never suspected theft. "Why didn't anyone catch this before?" Valerie sighed. "Because I trusted the people below me to do their jobs. Gerald Foster was supposed to be overseeing warehouse operations, but he was protecting his brother-in-law. It took your situation to make me look closer." She closed the folder. "I'm going to fire Howard Bennett. Not just for what he did to you, but for everything he's done. And Gerald Foster, too. But before I do, I want to make sure you're taken care of." Raymond felt relief, vindication, and something close to hope. "What are you offering?" Valerie smiled. "I want you to come back as the operations manager at Riverside. That's 2 levels above your old position. You'd oversee the entire logistics operation for that facility. Inventory management, shipping coordination, staff development. It comes with a salary of $75,000 a year, full benefits, and a signing bonus to make up for the time you've been out of work." She paused. "I know it's a big jump, but from everything I've heard, you're more than capable. Your team respects you. You know the work inside and out, and most importantly, you have integrity." Raymond's mind reeled. $75,000. That was more than double what he'd been making. It was enough to move to a better neighborhood, to stop living on the edge of financial disaster. "Why me?" he asked. "You could hire someone with a college degree, someone with management experience." Valerie leaned back. "Degrees and resumes don't tell me what kind of person someone is. What you did yesterday morning told me everything I need to know about your character. You put someone else's life ahead of your own interests. That's the kind of person I want leading my teams." They talked for another hour. Valerie explained the position, the expectations, the support she'd provide. She told him about her own background, how she'd started in accounting and worked her way up, how she'd taken over as CEO 3 years earlier, how she was determined to build a company culture that valued people over profit margins. Raymond found himself relaxing. Valerie was direct and honest. By the time he left her office, Raymond felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: optimism. But there was still the matter of Howard Bennett. Valerie told Raymond she'd handle it personally, and she wanted him there when it happened. "I want your team to see that actions have consequences," she said. "I want them to know that kindness matters, and that people who abuse their power don't get to keep it. Raymond agreed. He understood why Valerie wanted him present. It wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who'd ever been mistreated by Howard. 3 days later, Valerie called an all-staff meeting at the Riverside warehouse. Word had spread that something big was happening, and the loading bay was packed with workers when Raymond arrived. Walking into the warehouse with Valerie beside him, Raymond felt the weight of dozens of eyes. Marcus Chen caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod. Howard Bennett stood near the front, his arms crossed, clearly having no idea what was coming. Gerald Foster stood beside him, equally clueless. Valerie stepped onto a small raised platform. She wore a navy blue suit and heels, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Good afternoon," she began. "For those who don't know me, my name is Valerie Hutchinson, and I'm the CEO of Henderson Logistics. I'm here today because I need to address a serious issue that's been brought to my attention." The warehouse went completely silent. Valerie continued. 5 days ago, a man named Raymond Cooper did something extraordinary. He saw a woman in distress on the side of the road, and he stopped to help her. That woman was me. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Valerie's hand moved to her stomach. I was 7 months pregnant, and I was hemorrhaging. If Raymond hadn't stopped, if he hadn't gotten me to the hospital when he did, I would have lost my daughter. The doctors told me that later. Raymond saved both our lives. Valerie's eyes swept across the crowd, then landed on Howard. When Raymond arrived at work that morning, he was late because he'd spent 30 minutes making sure I was safe. And instead of being thanked for his heroism, he was publicly humiliated and fired by his manager. Howard's face had gone from red to white. Valerie's voice grew harder. Over the past week, I've been reviewing the management practices at this facility. What I've found is unacceptable. 17 formal complaints about workplace harassment, all ignored. Financial irregularities that suggest theft, a pattern of retaliation against workers who dared to speak up. She turned her full attention to Howard now. "Howard Bennett, you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Gerald Foster, you're also terminated for failing in your supervisory responsibilities and for covering up misconduct." Howard's mouth opened and closed. "You can't do this," he finally sputtered. "I've been with this company for 12 years. Valerie cut him off. "And in those 12 years, you've created a toxic environment and violated company policy repeatedly. I can absolutely do this, and I am." 2 security guards appeared. Howard looked around wildly, as if searching for allies, but no one moved to help him. Raymond watched as the man who'd fired him was led away, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. Gerald Foster went quietly, his shoulders slumped. When they were gone, Valerie turned back to the assembled workers. "I want to be clear about something. This company values integrity, compassion, and respect. Those aren't just words on a mission statement. They're principles we're going to live by." Then she gestured to Raymond. "Come up here, please." Raymond's heart hammered as he climbed onto the platform. Valerie smiled at him, then addressed everyone again. "Raymond Cooper is going to be your new operations manager. He's earned this position not just through his years of hard work and dedication, but through his character. He's the kind of leader I want representing this company." She turned to Raymond. "I know you were just trying to do the right thing. But what you did mattered. It mattered to me, and it should matter to all of us." The applause started slowly. Marcus Chen was the first to clap, his big hands creating a sharp, rhythmic sound. Then Jenny joined in, and within seconds the entire warehouse was clapping. Some people were whistling. Raymond saw tears on more than one face. He felt his own throat tighten, felt the sting of tears he tried to blink back. This was more than he'd expected, more than he'd let himself hope for. Valerie leaned close and said quietly, "You deserve this. Don't ever doubt it. After the meeting, Raymond's coworkers swarmed him. Marcus pulled him into a bear hug. Howard was a piece of work. We're all glad he's gone. Jenny hugged him too, crying openly. You always took care of us. It's about time someone took care of you. The warmth and support from his team filled Raymond with gratitude he couldn't quite express in words. The next few weeks were intense. Raymond moved into the operations manager office, though he had it repainted and replaced the furniture. Valerie assigned him a mentor named Patricia Cole, who'd been in logistics for 30 years. She taught him the management systems, the reporting structures, the corporate politics he'd need to navigate. You know this work better than most people with fancy degrees, Patricia said. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong here. Raymond threw himself into the job with focus. He studied the inventory reports, learned the budgeting software, and met with every department to understand their challenges. But he also made changes. He instituted a policy that if someone had a family emergency, they could leave without penalty as long as they communicated. He created a suggestion box where workers could anonymously report problems. And he started a mentorship program pairing experienced workers with new hires. Gradually, Raymond could feel the atmosphere in the warehouse shifting. People smiled more. The tension that had existed under Howard's management began to ease. Productivity actually increased, not because Raymond pushed people harder, but because they wanted to do good work for a boss who respected them. There were still hard days, but Raymond handled each challenge with patience, fairness, and a willingness to get his hands dirty alongside his team. At home, things were changing too. With his new salary, Raymond was able to move to a better apartment in a neighborhood with good schools. It was still modest. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room that got afternoon sunlight. But it was clean and safe, and Lucas loved it. The boy had his own room now, with space for a desk and bookshelves. They weren't rich, but they were stable. And stability, Raymond had learned, was a kind of wealth all its own. Valerie checked in regularly, always asking how things were going. She'd had her baby, a girl named Rebecca. She's perfect, Valerie wrote in one message, and she wouldn't be here without you. Raymond didn't know how to respond to that kind of gratitude, but he was learning to accept that what he'd done mattered, that one choice made in a moment of compassion had created ripples that changed lives. 6 months after being rehired, Raymond received an invitation to Henderson Logistics' annual leadership conference. It was held at a hotel downtown, 3 days of meetings and presentations. Raymond felt out of place among the polished executives, but Valerie found him at the opening reception and introduced him to other regional managers. On the second day, she asked him to speak on a panel about company culture. Raymond's hands shook as he stood at the podium. But when he started talking about his experience, about being fired for helping someone, about the culture of fear under Howard's management, about the changes he'd implemented and the results they'd produced, the room went quiet. People leaned forward. When he finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. Afterward, several managers approached him with questions. One man said, "You've got something most of us spend years trying to develop: authenticity. Don't lose that." A year after the day that changed everything, Raymond stood in the warehouse during the night shift, watching his team load trucks. The work was the same, but the feeling was different. There was laughter now, conversation, a sense that people mattered here. Marcus waved at him from across the loading bay. Jenny was training a new hire. Raymond thought about the choices that had led him here. The choice to stop for a stranger. The choice to accept Valerie's offer. The choice to lead with kindness. None of it had been easy, but the work he did mattered to real people with real lives. His phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "Dad, when are you coming home? I want to show you my science project." Raymond smiled and typed back, "On my way soon. Buddy, can't wait to see it." He took one last look around the warehouse, then headed for the exit. The night air was cool and clear. Raymond drove home thinking about the strange, unpredictable way life unfolded. A year ago, he'd been terrified about the future. Now he had stability, purpose, and the respect of people he admired. When he walked into the apartment, Lucas was waiting with a poster board covered in diagrams about the water cycle. The boy launched into an excited explanation, his hands gesturing wildly. Raymond sat down and listened, asking questions and offering encouragement. This, he thought, was what mattered. Not the job title or the salary. This quiet evening with his son, this feeling of being present, this sense that they were building something good together. Later, after Lucas went to bed, Raymond stood by the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Valerie was probably putting Rebecca to sleep. Somewhere out there, his former coworkers were living their lives, making their own choices. The world was vast and complicated, full of people struggling to do their best. Raymond didn't have any grand wisdom about it all. He just knew that kindness mattered, that character mattered, that showing up for people when they needed you could change everything. Sometimes kindness finds its way back, and sometimes it brings justice with it. Raymond had learned that lesson through loss and struggle and the slow rebuilding of a life. But he'd also learned something else, that the world, for all its cruelty and injustice, still had space for decent people doing decent things. That goodness wasn't naive or weak. That showing up for others when they needed you wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the only thing worth doing. He finished his coffee and checked the time. Lucas would be up soon, stumbling into the kitchen with sleep-mussed hair and a request for pancakes. Raymond would make them, slightly burnt around the edges the way they always turned out, and they'd eat together before starting their day. Then he'd drive to work, where challenges and opportunities awaited, where people depended on him to lead with integrity and compassion. It was a good life. Not perfect, never perfect, but good. And that, Raymond had learned, was enough.